Tonight, allow yourself to drift far, far away from the world, Close your eyes, if they haven't already, and imagine yourself in the midst of an ancient landscape, where the silence hums like distant breath, and the sky seems too wide to belong to this world. You are somewhere, in Central Asia, hundreds of years ago. The air is dry and thin, the wind always watching. The ground beneath your feet is neither welcoming nor cruel, just eternal. You are on the edges of the Gobi Desert, where clouds move slowly and sand collects in your lashes. This is not the world of emperors or conquests, not a place of legend or glory. It is the quiet world in between, the world of the people who made history happen by surviving it. This is the world of the camel tender, a forgotten life, lived in a forgotten rhythm, a life of dust, endurance, and strange rituals whispered to the stars, where the sun is your timekeeper, the camel your closest companion, and the desert your quietest enemy. So rest back now. Let the details flow past you like desert wind. Tonight's journey won't rush. It is slow, dry, and filled with the patient weight of time. We begin with a life most would never choose, but many were born into. Now, let us drift westward, deeper into the sands, past the low ridges of stony hills, beyond the salted flats, where nothing dares to grow. Let your breath slow again. Let your thoughts soften. For now we enter the story of a place, Khara-Khoto, the Black City, a silent ruin now. But once, it was alive. Imagine a small but mighty oasis settlement, tucked into the edge of the Gobi Desert. The wind swirls gently through crooked alleyways that no longer exist, brushing across collapsed walls and half-buried gates. You are walking through the echoes of an empire, one forgotten by most. Khara-Khoto, built by the Tangut people of the Western Xia dynasty, rose in the 11th century as a lonely jewel in the desert. Positioned strategically along the Silk Road's northern corridor, it thrived as a caravan stop. Silk, medicines, scrolls, incense all passed through its gates. The city itself was compact, yet formidable. High mud brick walls enclosed it in a rough square. A watchtower stood at each corner, always manned. A canal brought water from the nearby Aegean River. You would hear it flowing softly just outside the walls, a rare sound in the desert. Now imagine yourself inside that city, perhaps a monk, or a merchant, or a tired soldier. The days are dry and windblown, but the city breathes. Children play in narrow lanes, camels rest in shaded courtyards. Traders speak in a dozen languages: Chinese, Tibetan, Persian, Tangut. The smell of boiled millet and dust hangs in the air. At night, candles flicker behind lattice windows. Paper charms flutter beside doorways. Ritual chants echo from the small, clay-colored temples near the center of town. Some worship the Buddha, others bow to desert spirits. All drink from the same water. But then, the water changed. We don't know exactly when it began. Perhaps a shift in the river's path, perhaps sabotaged. Some say invading Mongols blocked the canal during their conquest in the 13th century. Others say the river simply receded. Desert places, after all, are ruled by time and wind more than by kings. And so Khara-Khoto began to die, slowly. First, the canal dried up, the gardens wilted, the wells turned shallow, the fish vanished. People began to leave, one by one, caravan by caravan. A city that had pulsed with distant voices fell quiet. Roofs caved in, doors creaked until they broke. Scrolls gathered dust in locked rooms, and the desert took back what had always been borrowed. By the 14th century, it was gone. What remained was only whispers and walls. For hundreds of years, nomads passed the ruins. Some feared them, some called them cursed. Few dared enter. It wasn't until the early 20th century that Khara-Khoto's name resurfaced. A Russian explorer, Pyotr Kozlov, stumbled upon the ruins in 1908. What he found shocked the world. In the sandy silence of collapsed temples, Kozlov discovered thousands of ancient Buddhist manuscripts, preserved in hidden chambers, texts in Tangut, Chinese, Sanskrit, histories, chants, stories no one had read in 600 years. He removed them hundreds of crates, worth, and sent them to St. Petersburg. And though the ruins still remain, sunken and solemn, the spirit of the city now lives behind museum glass. Faded words from a sunken world. You can still visit the site, but few do. It is too far, too quiet. The road there is long, the wind sharp. The city does not call out, it only waits. And if you were to stand there beneath the broken arch of the western gate, eyes squinting against the dust, you might hear something faint. Not voices, not wind, just the memory of water once flowing, and a city, now sleeping. The wind grows softer now. The dunes shift behind you. The sky stretches wide above, pale and empty. like parchment waiting for ink. Let us walk a little further west. Not far, just far enough for time to change. The year is no longer 1300, it is earlier, perhaps 1000, or maybe even before. You're standing near the edge of a desert cliff, not far from Dunhuang, an oasis city perched at the edge of the Taklaman. And in the cliffside low and hidden you see doors carved into rock, caves, dozens of them, some open, some bricked closed. Their mouths are dark, but what lies behind them is not danger, it is paper. Thousands upon thousands of pieces of paper. This is the Mogao Caves, known also as the Thousand Buddha Grottos, an ancient complex of hand-carved chambers filled with murals, statues, and scrolls. Once a holy site, then a quiet refuge, then forgotten. The story begins not with kings, but with pilgrims. Devotees walking long roads to reach Dunhuang, one of the last safe stops before the great western deserts. They carved these caves not as homes, but as offering sacred spaces filled with prayers and art. Lit by flickering oil lamps and painted with scenes of bodhisattvas floating above swirling clouds. The caves were not grand in size, but they were rich in spirit. They breathed with incense smoke and echoed with the soft murmur of sutras, and with time they grew in number. From a few shrines to hundreds, monks came, artists came, scribes, carpenters, entire generations of hands working in silence. But war, as always, edged closer. By the 10th century, this regiment's protected under Tang rule had grown vulnerable. Dynasties fell, warlords fought. The Silk Road was no longer safe, and so, the monks began to worry. The temples were no longer just places of prayer, they were vaults of knowledge. So they did what desert dwellers often do. They buried their treasures not under sand but within the walls. One small cave, now known as Cave 17, was chosen. It had once been a shrine, like the others, but its altar was cleared, its floor swept clean, and into it they packed manuscripts, scriptures, government documents, medical treatises, poems, almanacs, and letters written in over a dozen languages: Sanskrit, Tibetan, Sogdian, even Hebrew. It is said over 50,000 documents were hidden there, rolled, folded, stacked with care. They bricked the entrance, then painted over the wall. Nothing outside would suggest what lay inside. And then they left. No one knows for certain who sealed the cave, nor why it was never reopened. The world changed around it. Dynasties rose and fell, empires passed, and for nearly 1,000 years that small chamber remained untouched, sealed in the quiet dark. Until 1900, a Taoist monk and self-appointed caretaker of the caves, Wang Yuanlu, was cleaning and restoring some of the shrines when he noticed something odd in the plaster, the shape of a doorway, hollow behind. He chipped at it slowly and the doorway opened. Inside, scrolls taller than a man, books bound with twine, texts on silk, paintings, ritual banners, names of forgotten donors, written in brushwork still clear after centuries. Word spread. Scholars came, explorers. The British-Hungarian archaeologist R.L. Stein visited soon after, then Paul Pelliot of France. They acquired thousands of manuscripts and bought for mere coins, others taken. Today, many of the scrolls reside in libraries far from the desert: London, Paris, Beijing. They are studied in quiet rooms, behind glass, under white gloves. But here in the desert, the caves still wait. The murals fade slowly under time's hand. The wind whispers through narrow halls, and some say if you are silent, if you breathe, with the rhythm of the stone, you can still hear the soft sound of turning pages. Not pages of thrill or conquest, but prayers. Prayers tucked carefully away by tired hands, left to rest for 1,000 years. And somewhere beyond the outer ring of the camp, camel tenders lay awake, chewing on dried curd, eyes on the moon. Still, Mongol nobles were not like the royals of Europe. They kept their status in what they wore, what they ate, how they moved, but they rode horses like everyone else. They could still shoot a bow from the back of a galloping mount, and they preferred the open sky to carved stone walls. Yet when it came time to eat, the distance between them and their servants was made clear in the sheen of a well-fed belly, in the richness of meat that melted on the tongue, in the quiet starvation behind the tent flap. Food was more than nourishment, it was power, ritual, inheritance. What one ate and who served it marked the boundary between ruler and ruled. And as the feast ended, the nobles reclined, their minds turning not to gratitude, but to tomorrow's hunt, or conquest, or travel. They did not wash their dishes, they did not sweep their tents. That, too, fell to the invisible hands, and the fire crackled low. The tent glowed golden. Outside, the wind began to pick up again. Another cold desert night. Another full belly. For some dot. And now, let the fire fade. The camels have stopped groaning. The nobles have finished their feast. The scrolls in the hidden cave rest untouched. Their prayers long since whispered to the silence. The desert, that constant breath of time, has claimed them all in its own way. You've walked far tonight across dry riverbeds and ancient city walls. Through sand-choked memories and wind-swept ritual. You've stood in the sandals of a camel herder, walked beside the flickering ghosts of Khara-Khoto, and stepped gently into a cave that held words asleep for 1,000 years. And perhaps, just perhaps, you've heard something else too. Not just the stories, but the silences between them, the quiet weight of forgotten lives, the warm hum of the past, asking nothing of you except to be remembered gently, if only in passing thought. The truth is, history does not shout. Not always. Sometimes it simply waits, in the dust, in the ruins, in the hunger, in the cold water rationed at dawn, in the scroll unread for centuries, in the meals divided by status, not need. The Gobi is still there. You know it stretches across Mongolia and northern China, a great whispering expanse. The wind still moves across its surface, shifting dunes, just as it did for the herders and nobles and monks of long ago. Some of their bones may still lie beneath the sand. Some of their words may still echo in stone, but mostly they have returned to silence. And now, so may you. Feel the stillness returning. Let the journey fade behind you. The caravan has stopped for the night. The animals have folded their legs and settled. The fire is no longer burning high, only embers now, casting a soft orange glow. Let your breath match that rhythm. Slow, gentle, barely there. You are no longer walking. You are resting now, surrounded not by dust, but by calm, not by struggle, but by peace. And as your thoughts drift further into the dunes of sleep, know that the past does not chase you. It simply watches, quietly, like the stars above the Gobi, ancient, unmoving, and content to flicker softly until morning. Good night, traveler. Sleep well. History will wait. You wake before the sun. Not because you want to, but because the duties never sleep. The wind is pressing against the narrow window panes. You can hear the sea below, dark, black, endless. You pull your coat tight, stiff from salt and too many repairs. There's a leak in the roof again. The blanket you slept under is still damp. That you are a lighthouse keeper, and you live at the edge of the world. Most lighthouses in the 19th century weren't built near towns or ports. They were placed where danger was in sharp reefs, remote islands, jagged coastlines where ships were likely to be swallowed by the sea. And so, the people who kept them lit were also placed there. You had a small tower, a cramped storeroom, a logbook, maybe a second keeper if you were lucky. But often it was just you and the sea, and the endless climb. The lamp at the top didn't light itself. Each evening, as the sky turned silver blue, you climbed a narrow spiral staircase of cold stone, carrying fuel gallons of it, heavy sloshing, slamming against your knees. Whale oil or later, kerosene. Your lantern had to burn through the entire night, rotating without fail. A moment's darkness could mean the death of a ship, its crew, and their cargo, so you trimmed the wick, cleaned the lens, checked the mirrors, adjusted the gears. And when everything was working, you stood there in the cold chamber, waiting. Sometimes you read, more often you just listened. To the creaking metal, the faint scrape of the turning, light the moan of wind through the cracks in the tower. Your food was simple, salted meat, hard bread, sometimes potatoes, always boiled water, because the rain barrel was never truly clean. If a storm came, you had to keep the light burning, no matter what, even if the wind screamed against the glass, even if ice formed on the stairs, even if lightning struck the tower itself, and it did. Sometimes. In those moments your hands shook as you worked, but there was no applause for bravery, no medal, just the logbook, just the same small entry, storm lamp maintained, and then the days, the endless slow-moving days. You cleaned the lens, you wrote in the book, you watched the sea. There were no neighbors, no shops, no visitors, except for the supply boat once a month if the weather allowed. Some keepers went months without speaking aloud. They say some began to talk to the gulls, or the rocks. They say some stopped talking altogether. You never left the island, you never missed a shift, and if you died, slipped on the steps, or fell, Ilu were often buried right there, behind the tower. A small wooden cross, no service, no family, but still, the light kept turning, and still, the sea kept trying to take it. The lighthouse is empty. That's what they said when the relief crew arrived in December of 1900. just days after the worst of the winter storms had finally passed. The Flannan Isles were used to rough weather. They were lonely stacks of rock off the western coast of Scotland, wind-lashed and barren, a place even the sheep avoided, but this time, something was different. The men who arrived were used to hardship. They were seamen, accustomed to salt-stung air and jagged cliffs. They climbed the rocks, made their way to the lighthouse, and found it silent, too silent. The gate was closed. The door was locked from the inside. The kitchen looked as if someone had just stepped away for a moment, plates set out, a meal half prepared. The clock had stopped ticking. One of the chairs was overturned, but the tower was empty. 3 men had manned the lighthouse: Thomas Marshall, James Ducat, and Donald MacArthur, all experienced keepers, all strong, seasoned, all gone. Their oilskins' heavy coats meant to protect from wind and spray were missing. 2 of them, anyway. The third coat still hung on its hook. That was the first odd thing. The logbook was the second. Inside were entries that didn't match the expected weather patterns. They wrote of strange, fierce storms far worse than what surrounding stations had recorded. One note said the men were praying, something not commonly logged. Another described an unshakable sense of fear. Then nothing, no final entry, no mention of what happened next. Investigators scoured the island. They found damage on the west landing: twisted metal rails, dislodged stones. It looked as though a mighty wave had slammed into the side of the island with more force than usual, a wave tall enough to sweep a man into the sea, or 3. That's one theory, that one of the men went outside to secure equipment during a storm. The others followed, and all were taken by the sea. Perhaps they slipped, perhaps the wind caught them, perhaps the rock betrayed them, slick with salt and algae. But why would all 3 leave at once? Why take the risk? And why was one coat left behind? Some suggested foul play, a fight, madness. Others whispered about ancient Celtic legends, spirits of the sea, vengeful Selkies, or the Old Norse goddesses who were said to walk the cliffs during storms. But these were just stories told in the dark. The official report said they were lost to the elements, that the sea had claimed them, as it had so many others. The lighthouse was refitted. New keepers arrived, but none stayed long. Even today, when boats pass the Flannan Isles, sailors lower their voices. The tower still stands, empty now, automated. The light blinks without hands. And the gulls still circle. Some say they are waiting for 3 men to return, or perhaps for someone new. But the truth is, the sea does not give back what it takes. It merely swallows and moves on. And in the cold mist of the Hebrides, 3 names are still whispered: Ducat, Marshall, MacArthur, and a lighthouse that once watched over the sea, now keeps its secrets. Before the lighthouses, before fuel and Fresnel lenses and the duty logbooks and storm-soaked boots, there was only the sea. And those who dared to cross it. Long before modern maps, coastal people knew their world not through straight lines and coordinates, but through rhythm, through current and cloud, gull and star, wind and silence. They sailed not with charts, but with stories, with memory, and with faith. Imagine standing on a rocky shore 1,000 years ago, a crescent moon overhead, no lights, only the dark water glimmering like black glass. You are preparing to sail. In a carved canoe, the island you aim for is 2 days away. Across deep unknown waters, you cannot see it, but you feel its direction. This was not guesswork. It was a discipline passed through generations. Polynesian wayfinders, for example, could detect the shape of islands by reading the way waves refracted back toward them. An art called itak. They memorized cloud shapes, coral colors, and the patterns in bird flight. But it wasn't just about navigation. It was about reverence. To sail was to trust your soul to the sea. And so, people built stones, shrines, sacred markers on coastal cliffs to guide the living and honor the dead. In the British Isles, Before the Romans came, fishermen carved capandering symbols into seaside boulders, mystic spirals thought to protect them from drowning. In ancient Greece, sailors left offerings at small whitewashed temples to Poseidon, god of the sea, before launching into the wind-dark waves. Some of these stones still stand, smooth and wind-worn, forgotten, mostly. But you can still find them on lonely Scottish cliffs, beside Norwegian fjords, hidden in Japanese harbors, quiet shapes that once held immense power. In the Faroe Islands, villagers whispered about sea spirits called Nika, shapeshifters who lived in the surf. Offerings of bread and feathers were left in small rock cairns along the shore to appease them. And in the Arctic, Inuit families told of Khara-Khoto creatures who pulled children under if they walked too close to cracks in the ice. To protect against them, some families carved warning faces into ivory, buried just beneath the snow, not to stop the spirits, but to remind the living. Meanwhile, the Phoenicians, great traders of the ancient world, marked dangerous harbors with towers of stacked stone and lit them with open flame. The Romans would later call them pharos and copy them across the empire. But not all markers were warnings. Some were farewells. In Micronesia, long flat stones were arranged like open hands facing the sea. Each represented a voyager who had died, crossing to a neighboring island. They were not named, but their direction told their story. The waves would continue their journey. And today, in parts of Ireland and Cornwall, there are stone slabs older than any written record covered in lichen, half swallowed by grass, marking where fishermen vanished. The names are gone, but the sea remembers. These were the first lighthouses, in a way, not signals of light, but signals of memory and warning and respect. Imagine them now, just beyond the mist, quiet markers of those who went before, whose boats never returned, whose families stood barefoot in the cold wind, staring out toward the waves that did not bring them back. And in the wind, something like a whisper, but it isn't words, just the sound of the sea moving through ancient stone. The coastline changes, depending on who you are. For one man, it is a place of damp boots, cold fingers, and storms that threaten his roof. For another, it is a place of summer picnics, salted air, and oysters on silver plates. The same waves, the same wind, but two very different lives. Let's walk up the hill now, away from the lighthouse. The stones under your feet give way to gravel, and then to finely paved paths. Gulls still circle overhead, but they are quieter here. You hear laughter, music, and the soft clinking of glass on glass. You've arrived at a seaside manor, perhaps on the English coast near Devon, or the cliffs of Normandy in France. The year is sometime in the mid-1800s, and the view from this estate is magnificent. Just there, beyond the hedge, you can see the light from the nearby lighthouse flashing in the distance, a beacon to ships, and a distant, unimportant detail for the guests enjoying afternoon tea. Inside the drawing room, velvet curtains ripple slightly from the breeze. A harp plays softly in the corner. A woman reads aloud from a serialized novel. The guests sip chilled Madeira and enjoy oysters freshly plucked from the rocky beds below. They are served with little spoons and lemon slices. None of them have ever set foot in the fishermen's huts just down the cliff. They do not know the smell of rotting nets, or the sting of salt in split knuckles. They have never bartered a single mackerel for stale bread. For them, the sea is simply part of the scenery, a background to be painted, a breeze to perfume the garden. Meanwhile, down below, a fisherman crouches in the mud, scraping barnacles off the hull of his boat. He hasn't caught enough cod this week. His youngest child has a cough. The salt has begun to crack his boots. He can see the manor from here, its windows glowing gold. Will not go there. In 18th and 19th century Europe, coastal elites built homes directly above fishing communities. They wanted the view but not the labor. They built stone seawalls to prevent flooding, even if it redirected water into the villages below. They commissioned paintings of shipwrecks and walked past the drowned sailors' families without stopping. Their tables were always full. Roast goose, wild sea bass, spiced wine, imported oranges, the fish caught below their feet, cleaned by tired hands, served by pale maids who smelled of seawater and starch. During storms, they would gather at the windows to watch the waves crash against the cliffs, exclaiming how beautiful it was, how dramatic. The next day, the beach might be scattered with splintered wood, a mast, a body. A boot servants would clean it up before the next luncheon. In Normandy, aristocratic women would sometimes walk barefoot on the shore at sunrise, accompanied by a maid carrying a parasol. They said the sea air improved the complexion. They would not look the fishermen in the eye. In Cornwall, The gentry enjoyed sea bathing from covered carriages, dipped briefly by servants and pulled back to shore. They dined on clotted cream and fresh trout, while the men who caught it spat blood into rags from untreated lung infections. And in Ireland, coastal landowners evicted whole villages of fisherfolk to make way for private sea lodges. They called them quiet retreats. The local people simply called them loss. Of course, not every noble was cruel. Some paid their workers fairly, some funded rescue lifeboats and rebuilt churches after floods, but always, there was a distance, a kind of salt-soaked silence between the cliff and the beach, even as the waves carried their stories back and forth, up and down, over and over now. The fire has grown low, the mist is closing in, the tide has turned, and somewhere far off in the night you can still hear it, the soft rhythmic cry of a distant buoy calling out across the open sea. We've walked tonight through lonely towers, vanishing men, whispering stones, and the quiet contrasts between hunger and feast. We've listened to the sea, not as a setting but as a character, deep, patient, watching. Lighthouses still stand along the world's edges. Some are automated, some have been turned into museums. A few still flicker to life at dusk, quietly, maintained by someone you'll never meet, but their stories remain. The forgotten hands that climbed, spiral stairs in the dark, the wind that bent iron, the lights that blinked out, and the ones that never did. And as you drift now, slowly, softly remember this. Not every light is meant to guide you to safety. Some are simply there to remind you that you are not alone in the dark, that someone, somewhere, once stood watch. Rest now, the storm has passed, the oil is full, the lamp is lit, and the sea will wait until morning.